Hello and welcome back to the SameGame tutorial, part 8, and let's just jump straight back into it, shall we? So in the last part of the tutorial, we created this for loop instead of our shiftIcons function, and this for loop is helping us to shift icons downwards on the grid whenever empty gaps has been formed. In this part of the tutorial, we are going to create another for loop, and this one is going to help us to shift icons from right to left in order to fill in any empty columns that we may get. And this for loop is actually only going to be iterating through the very last row of a grid in order to check for any non-values. And this is because if we happen to get any non-values at the very bottom row of the grid, then that means that all the other grid cells in the same column must also have non-values. So we're going to go ahead and create this for loop now. So we'll create a few empty lines and then we'll say for I in range, and inside of this range function we are going to add two values which this for loop is going to iterate through. So the first value is going to be grid size minus icons per row, and then the second value is going to be grid size minus 1, like so. So now we have a for loop which is going to iterate through the values of grid size minus icons per row, which is going to give us the value 90, to grid size minus 1, which is going to give us the value of 99. So from the value 90 to 99. And now inside of this for loop we are going to create an if statement, and this if statement is going to check if the icon in the icons list at this index position is equal to none, and if it is, then we have identified an empty grid cell at the very last row of a grid. So we're going to say if icons list, and then we'll say I instead of these brackets, is none, like so. And now we want to go ahead and create a while loop, and this while loop is going to be very similar to the one that we created up here inside of our first for loop, because this while loop is going to check how many columns we can traverse to the right until we find one that contains icons and not non-values. So let's go ahead and do that now. So we'll create a new line, and the first thing we want to write here is a variable, and this variable we are going to call CM, which stands for column multiplier, and we're going to set this to the value of 0 to start with. And then we're going to create the while loop, and it is going to look like this: while icons list at the index of I plus CM is none. And then we're going to create another condition. So we're going to say and I plus CM is less than grid size minus 1, like so. So now we have a while loop which is checking if the current empty grid cell in our for loop has another empty grid cell to the right, and then we're also checking if I plus CM is less than grid size minus 1. And this last condition we are only using to make sure that the Ren'Py engine doesn't try to check if there's an empty grid cell to the right of the very last grid cell in our grid. And now the next thing we want to do inside of this while loop is to make sure that we are adding 1 to the CM variable. So we're going to say CM plus equals 1. And this we are doing much like we have done up here, where we added 1 to the RM variable. But instead we are adding 1 to the CM variable so that we will get the actual value, which represents how many rows we were able to traverse to the right until we found a column that contains icons and not empty values. And now the next thing that we want to do is to make sure that we are using the value which this CM variable contains after the while loop has finished iterating to move the icon that resides inside of this column to the left into the empty grid cell that was identified with this if statement. So we're going to create a new line, like so, and then the first thing we're going to do is to make sure that this icon that resides on this position is not none, so we're going to write if icons list at the index of I plus cm is not none, like so. So now we can go ahead and move the icon that resides inside of this list at this position into the empty grid cell. So to do that, the first thing we will do is to make sure that we are moving it on the screen by using its X attribute. So we're going to write icons list I plus cm dot x, and then we're going to write minus equals, and then we're going to create a calculation like we have done before to move the icon to the right spot. So we'll write brackets, and then we're going to say icon size times cm plus icons padding times cm, like so. And since we have said minus equal, we are going to get the icon to move from its current position to the right into this value that this calculation will give us. And now we want to make sure that we are also updating the icons list to reflect the change of the icon's position on the grid. So we're going to say icons list at the index position of I, which is the empty grid cell that we identified up here. So we're going to give this the value of the icon that we found in the other column. So we're going to say icons list at the index of I plus cm, like so. And then we're going to make sure that we are setting this value right here to none. So we're going to say equals to none, like so. And now we also want to remember to change the index attribute value of the icon that we moved to the empty grid cell. So we're going to say icons list at the index of I dot index is equal to I, like so. So now we have implemented a bunch of code which is going to help us to identify an empty grid cell at the bottom row of the grid to then fill that empty space with an icon that may reside in a column to the right. But now we also need a way to be able to shift all the other icons that may also reside in the same column to the left. And to do that, we are going to create a for loop, and it is going to look like this. For icon in range, and inside of this range we are going to say grid size divided by icons per row, like so. So that means that we are going to get a for loop which is going to iterate through the values of 0 to grid size divided by icons per row, which is going to give us the value of 10. So from 0 to 10. Now before we continue, I'm going to go ahead and fix some of these spelling mistakes I've done up here, such as these icons size should be icon size, and icons padding should be icon padding, like so. So now we want to go ahead and move all of the other icons that resides in the same column as this one did before we moved it to the left, in order to move these to the left as well. And to do that, we can copy paste all of these lines of code into this for loop, like so, as we are going to do more or less the same thing. The next thing we want to do now is to make sure that we are changing these index position values inside of these brackets so that we are grabbing the correct icons. For this first if statement, we want to check if the icon that resides above this one in the grid is not a non-value, and if it's not, then we can also move this into the left column. So to do that, we are going to wrap this calculation into brackets, so like so, and then we're going to say minus another set of brackets, icons per row times icon. So now we are grabbing the icon that resides above this one in the grid to move it to the left, just as we did up here. For the next row, we are going to change this index position to say the same thing. So we're going to remove that, and then we're going to copy paste this value right here like so. So now we're moving its position on the x-axis into the left column. For the next row, we're going to say that the empty grid cell in the empty column should have the value of this icon. So we're going to say I minus brackets icons per row times icon, like so. And then we're going to say that it has the value of this icon. So we're going to paste that value in here, like so. And then for the next one, we're going to say that this icon at this position should now be the value of none, since we moved it into this position. So we're going to paste the value in here again, like so. And then for the last one, we're going to say I minus icons per row times icon dot index is equal to cm. But rather than saying that it should be equal to, we should say that it's minus equal to cm, so that we are removing the value that exists inside of this variable from the value that the index attribute already has, which will give us the correct index attribute. So now we have all of the necessary code that we need in order to shift icons down and left to fill in any empty gaps in the grid. The next thing we want to do is to move these 2 lines of code down to the bottom of the function. So we'll create a few empty lines here, and then we'll paste these 2 lines in the same line as this for loop. And then we can clean up some of these empty space here, like so. So now we should have a shiftIcons function, which is going to shift icons down and left. So let's go ahead and test this now. So now we want to try to delete matches from this grid in order to form an empty column. And then we want to see if any icons that reside to the right of that empty column will shift left to fill in the empty gap. So I'm gonna start to delete a bunch of matches. And here we can see that we have got a match right here at the bottom row of our grid. And if I delete this group of matches, we should be able to see that first these 2 columns right here should shift down, and then all of these icons should then shift left. So let's go ahead and try that. And as we can see, that worked, as the icons both shifted down and then to the left to fill in this empty column. Now let's see if we can form any other empty columns as well. So here we can see that we have another group right here. So if I click to remove that, we should see that these icons will shift down into this empty grid cell, and then all of these icons should shift left to fill in this empty column. And as we can see, that seemed to also work as expected. So now we can go back to the code and see what else we can do. The next thing we want to implement into the game is going to be the countdown timer. And as long as this timer has not run out, then the player can keep playing to try to remove as many groups of matching icons as possible. And the game ends either when the timer has run out or when there are no more possible matches. So to create this timer, we are going to make a new screen. And this screen is going to both display the current timer value as well as the user's score. Before we go ahead and create this screen, we want to create a variable which is going to contain the timer's value. So we're going to go down into the start label, and we'll create a new line and define our variable. And we can call this one countdown time, like so. And then for this example, we can set it to be 60 seconds, like so. But you can of course set this to any other value if you rather have something else. And then we'll go ahead and scroll up a bit until we reach this SameGame screen. And then we'll create a few empty lines above here, like so. And then we can create the screen. So we're going to say screen, and we can call this score UI, for example. And inside of here, we want to create the timer. So we're going to use the timer displayable within Ren'Py. And for that, we're going to say timer. And the value that we want to put after this is the time that it should take before the action that we will give it should run. So we're going to write 0.1, which will be 1 second. And then we want to create an action that this timer should run. So we're going to say action. And the action that we want to run is going to be a Ren'Py function called if. And this if function is going to help us to check what the countdown timer value is currently set to. Because what we want to do is to make sure that as long as the countdown timer is more than 0, then we want to subtract 0.1 from its value. But if it happens to be the value of 0, then we want to stop the timer and do something else, such as showing a game over screen. So we're going to say if, and then instead of here we will say round countdown time is more than 0. So what are we doing here exactly? Well, we are rounding the countdown time variable so that we are getting an integer value instead of a float value, and then we are checking if that is more than 0. But why are we rounding the countdown time variable? Well, that is because Python can be a little bit finicky to work with when it comes to float numbers and calculating with these. So to make it a little bit easier for us, we are rounding this value when we are checking what it is inside of the if statement. So now if this condition happens to be true, we want to do something. So we're going to write a comma here, like so, and then we're going to say true equals. So if this condition is true, then we're going to change the countdown time variable by subtracting 0.1 from its value. And to do that, we're going to use the Ren'Py Python function called setVariable. So we're going to write set variable, like so. And then we're going to give it the name of the variable that we want to change. So we're going to write 2 quotation marks, like so. And then we're going to say countdown time. And then after that, we're going to create a comma. And then we're going to say countdown time minus 0.1, like so. So now we are decreasing the countdown time by 0.1. But now if this condition equals to false instead, we want to do something else. So we're going to write comma after this set variable function call. And then we're going to say false equals, and for now we're going to give this a null action function. So we're going to write null action, like so. And this just means that we don't want anything specific to happen if this condition is false, instead of having to add something right away now. The timer displayable also has another property called repeat, and we can use this property in order to set how many times the timer should repeat. In our case, we only want to repeat the timer as long as the countdown time is more than 0. So to do that, we are going to say repeat, like so. And then we're going to say if, and then we can copy paste this condition right here, like so. And then we're going to say if that condition is true, then we want to set this repeat property to true. So we're going to write true with a capital T. But if it's false, we want to say that it equals to false, like so. So now the timer will only repeat as long as the countdown time is more than 0. The next thing we want to do is to add a text displayable to this screen so that we can see what the countdown time is inside of the game. So we're going to create a new line, and then we're going to say text, and then 2 quotation marks, like so. And then inside of here, we're going to add a placeholder so that we are getting the countdown time variable to show as a whole number instead of a decimal number. So we're going to write 2 curly brackets, like so. And then inside of there, we're going to say colon dot 0f, like so. So that means that we want 0 decimals to show. And then we're going to say format. And then we're going to put the variable in here. So we're going to say countdown time, like so. Now the next thing that we want to do is to make sure that we are aligning this text on the screen as well as giving it a different color since the standard color is white and this doesn't really stand out much in our game. So we're going to write a line and then we're going to give it a X position of 0.01 and the same for the Y position, 0.01, like so. So that will put it at the very top left corner of a game. And then we're going to give it a color. So we're going to say color. And then inside of these two quotation marks, we are going to write hash symbol and then 6 zeros to give it a black color. And now we want to make sure that we are showing the screen inside of the game. So we're going to scroll down into the start label. And then we're going to create a new line just above this jump setup icons statement. And then we're going to say show screen score UI, like so. So now we can save and run the game to see what this looks like. So here in the start menu of our game, we're going to press start and then see if we can spot the timer counting down from 60 to 0. And as we can see, we indeed have a counter up here in the left hand corner of our game, and it seems to be counting down from 60 to 0. So that is working as intended. In the next part of the tutorial, we are going to implement a scoring system that is going to allow the user to collect points for the matches that they have deleted from the grid. And this score is also going to be showing in the left corner of a game. So I thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.